We're very happy to be back online for the webinar this morning for two reasons. One, because it's a very important and timely topic that we're going to explore today, which is exciting in and of itself, and for the excellent guests that will help us do that. And also because this is the last webinar before we meet you all, hopefully, all of you in person next week in Turin. So lots and lots of things to be excited about. The session today is going to look at the importance of extending social protection to refugees and other forcibly displaced persons and their families. And we're going to do that with, like I said, two guests. The first, I'm going by the order that I see them on my screen. The first is Mattia Polvanesi. Mattia is a social protection officer with UNHCR based in the headquarters in Geneva, and he is leading the global work on transitioning from humanitarian assistance to national social protection systems, especially in contexts of protracted displacement. And you will remember that we've discussed this changing nature of displacement towards more protracted situations in the initial webinars in this course. Before joining UNHCR, he worked for different international institutions such as the World Food Programme, UNRWA, and the European Union to strengthen the design and implementation of national social protection systems and programs in fragile contexts, including Mozambique, Palestine, and Syria. So Mattia, first of all, thank you very much for joining. It's a pleasure to have you as part of this course. And then the second guest today is Clara van Panhuys, who is an ILO colleague. She is currently working for the Social Protection Department of the ILO, again based in Geneva. She is focusing on working with governments, workers, and employer organizations to support the extension of social protection to migrant workers, refugees, and their families. And prior to that, she also has experience in the humanitarian field in various conflict countries for different organizations, for example, in Pakistan, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Thai-Myanmar border, focusing on fostering respect for human rights and providing assistance and protection to conflict-affected populations. So, Clara, once again, thank you very much also for being here with us today. So the session today is not going to take the form of a traditional lecture. There will be no presentation. It will be more of a conversation. I have prepared a few questions for our guests, and I would like to, as usual, warmly encourage you to help us make this session as engaging, as interactive as possible. Feel free to ask your questions, share your comments, share your reflections, either by raising your hand using the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, or by using the chat box, which I can see now you are already getting very adept at. I see that there are two questions in the chat box, and I'll get to them in a moment. As usual, the session is being interpreted, and you can you can choose the channel that you want to listen to by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and then selecting either Arabic or English. Both the languages are being recorded, and the recordings will be put on the eCampus at the end of the session. So since I mentioned the eCampus, let me get to the two questions that I have in the chat so that we can start the session without any doubts. The weekly quizzes, so this course is different from the other courses that ITCILO is doing because being a blended course, the structure is slightly different. So we will have one quiz at the end of the online phase, which will go online between today and tomorrow, let's say. We will have a quiz at the end of the face-to-face phase, covering the topics that we will discuss during the face-to-face workshop. And then we will have one quiz at the end of everything, which will cover topics from both components, the online and the face-to-face. So up until now, there are no weekly quizzes on the eCampus. They will be open starting from either later today, like I said, or tomorrow morning, depending on the availability of the translation, of course. And for the discussion session, Edith, I think you are referring, but correct me if I'm wrong, I think you are referring to the forum, the weekly forums that are on the eCampus, and then it's up to you. You can draw from your experience, you can post your reflection. Of course, being a discussion, you're very much encouraged to respond to what other participants are saying as well. So if you want to engage with their posts and reply or add to or ask questions or clarifications to what they have posted, of course, you're more than welcome to do that. It's actually something that we'd be very happy to see. So I hope that I covered that I replied to your question in a satisfactory way. Anything else that you think of throughout the session that is directed at the guest speakers today, feel free again to post them in the chat box in either English or Arabic, or raise your hands. We are a relatively small group today, so we can give you the floor directly, and we'll be happy to hear from you. That being said, let's delve into the topic of the session that we have prepared for today. Like I said, I have prepared a few questions for our speakers, but I am very much hoping, and I'm really looking forward to the questions and the discussion that can also be sparked by interventions from our participants. So once again, feel free to come in at any point. I'm going to stop after the first round of questions and give you a little bit of a breather to the speakers, and also see if there are any reactions from the floor, and then we can move into the second round. Okay, so let's get into it. So we've been discussing in the past couple of weeks with our participants. We've been discussing the different protection gaps and the different needs that displaced populations can have, and also trying to look at it from both sides. So looking at the gaps and looking at the potential as well, and what is the potential for improving and expanding the level of rights and the level of protection that displaced populations can enjoy. And we do know that despite the efforts and despite the growing awareness of the importance of making sure that that refugees and other forcibly displaced persons are included as much as possible, especially in national social protection systems, we know that they still rarely enjoy the same rights as nationals. And one of the biggest barriers that they may find is that national legislation may be a little bit inadequate. It may restrict the access to either one or several social security benefits, or the level itself of the benefits that are accorded can be, like I said, inadequate. However, we also know, we have experience that shows, evidence that shows that extending social protection to forcibly displaced populations increases their resilience, reduces poverty, reduces exclusion, fosters social cohesion, and reduces vulnerability. So when we fail to incorporate refugees, asylum seekers, and other forcibly displaced persons in the national social security systems, we are missing an opportunity, because the length of stay outside the countries of origin, as we have seen, can be protracted, can last for years, even for decades, and it can be indefinite. So this is a little bit the background against which we are going to set up our discussion today. I am going to start by asking my first question to Mattia. So Mattia, we've talked a little bit about the legal and governance framework that let's say that underlies the access to decent work for forcibly displaced persons and refugees, and we've talked a little bit about the role of the Refugee Convention, but more in a general way. So can you tell us a bit more? Can you help us understand a bit more why or how the Refugee Convention and other international instruments can help when it comes to enhancing access to social protection for refugees and other displaced persons? Thank you, Mattia, over to you.
Thank you, Miki, for inviting me, and thank you for your question. I'm very happy to be here. So I will say a few words about the convention, but then I would try to set a bit the scene on the why it's becoming increasingly important to include refugees and other forcibly displaced in national social protection systems. So the rights to social protection was already recognized in the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. And there are a number of articles there that really state clearly rights to social security and labor legislation on a par with the citizens. And then this was really also reinforced by other instruments. And I would say the biggest step up in these in the acknowledgement of the fact that refugees do have rights to social protection was the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018, and which is being operationalized through a multi-stakeholder approach, which really is at the end of the day, the Global Refugee Forum that occurs every 4 years, and we had the last one in December last year, and we can talk more about this later on. But what I wanted to say is why this is increasingly important. Why do we have this Global Compact on Refugees in 2018? I think this is the question. And I mean, I understand you already had some conversation during the training around displacement, but maybe I will try to retrieve some of that information and set the scene. So I think it's important that we acknowledge as you said, the changing nature of displacement especially over the past decade, as forced displacement has not only been on a constant rise, but also this rise is faster and faster. So we have multiple crises happening over the past few years. We had Ukraine, Sudan, Afghanistan, and so on. And we had in 2022 the regrettable milestone of more than 100 million forced displaced people, which last year reached 117 million, and we project for 2024 more than 130 million forced displaced people globally. And in addition to this increasingly fast pace, you mentioned the protracted nature. It's another very important factor that we need to keep in mind, as basically 4 out of 5 refugees are displaced for what UNHCR defines protracted is more than 5 years, but in practice this means often the majority is more than 10 years displaced in the same location. I think the average is 11 years, but in many contexts it can be 2 or 3 decades. So this is a problem. And the other factor is that this scale and the speed of forced displacement is outpacing solutions. So again, what UNHCR defines as durable solutions is return, resettlement, and integration. These are the traditional solutions to forced displacement, and only few refugees are actually able to achieve this. So I think these 3 elements really call for looking more and more at how can we include refugees into national systems, including social protection systems. And we should also be mindful of the fact that these figures, so currently 117 million, more than half of these are internally displaced people. They are not refugees. So these are people who are seeking safety in other parts of their own of the countries where they are, so they didn't cross an international border. And these, when we look at inclusion in national social protection systems, of course, has different implications if we are talking about non-nationals or IDPs that oftentimes are nationals. Out of the 117 million forced displaced people, refugees are about 30 million. And this is a figure that doubled over the past 7 years. So there again, the increase is really striking. And when, I don't know if this was covered during the training, but a refugee is a person who is outside of their country of nationality, has a fear of persecution or conflict, and is unable or unwilling to avail of the protection of their own country of origin. So this, I think, in a nutshell, is why there is increasing attention to work on inclusion in national systems for refugees and other forcibly displaced people. And this is what we say is this is not a solution per se, but it's a pathway towards a solution. So it can improve the well-being of forcibly displaced people while we are working on a durable solution, which of course has a number of also legal aspects, which is a lot more gradual. So Miki, I will pose it here as an introduction, perhaps, to answer your general question about the landscape and the convention. I mentioned the Global Compact on Refugees, which was a key milestone in 2018, which introduced the concept of, well, first of all, reinforced the idea of the importance and of inclusion in social protection and the fact that refugees have rights to social protection, but also introduced the concept of responsibility sharing between host countries' governments, as well as the international community on the other side. And I hope throughout the session, maybe we can have with Clara the opportunity to unpack on the most recent developments at the Global Refugee Forum. So over for now, but happy to get more questions on this.
Sounds great, Mattia. Thank you very much for this overview, also for really showing a little bit more in context and in concrete steps what it means to work at the heart, or like straddling the different components of what we call the humanitarian development and peace nexus, and really bringing everything together with this holistic approach. That is something that has definitely been discussed and has come up several times during the sessions up until now. And also you brought this idea, you brought to light this idea of complementary solutions, or these complementary pathways towards a solution. This is something that we may have time to discuss a little bit further today, but this is also going to be at the heart of one of the sessions during the face-to-face workshop. So it's a very nice link to what's going to happen in the coming weeks as well. So thank you very much for that, and we'll get back to you perhaps later for the second round. Clara, I'm going to now pass the floor to you. So thank you very much again for joining us. And my question to you is a bit twofold. So the first part is a bit of a, let's say, a bit of a rhetoric question, a bit cheeky perhaps, to start the discussion, and then a little bit more on the concrete steps of how we go about it. So it would be the following. Can you tell us, first of all, whether all refugees and forcibly displaced persons have the right to social security and access to healthcare? And then, and this is a bit the cheeky part, but then can you tell us how this translates concretely at the national level? Thank you, Clara.
Thank you, and good morning or afternoon to everyone. I'm very happy to be here, be part of this quite comprehensive course that's been going on for a few years already. So to set the scene, as you know, the course is about decent work, and one of the 4 strategic objectives of decent work, of the decent work agenda, is social protection. So just a few words about social protection first. At the ILO, we use the words social protection and social security interchangeably. referring to things that mean the same things.
Excuse me, Clara, we don't have the interpretation in Arabic. So sorry, I have to ask you to pause.
To start again, maybe?
Just we need to wait that the interpreters also confirm they are back.
Marion,
See?
can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Mirna theoretically took over.
But the Arabic was not on, so
Hold on.
Start again, no problem. So I was saying hello to everyone, and as we are today in the course on access to decent work for refugees, I just wanted to start with saying that hopefully, as you know, social protection is one of the 4 strategic objectives of decent work, of the decent work agenda. And before I answer the question, I wanted to say a few things about the term social protection itself.
Clara, I have to stop you for a moment because I see both interpreters are muted. So I don't
Mirna
know.
says she cannot apologize. The colleague says
Yes.
she cannot unmute herself. She's
yes,
unable to unmute
she
herself.
just wrote to me.
Oh, okay. Oh, I can see
If you
it
want,
in the
I
chat.
can take over until she's done, until she can manage.
She says now it's fine.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
so
thank you. Sorry.
let's try and see if it works. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for this, Clara. Thank you for your
No
patience.
problem. So hello again to all non-English speaking people, participants. So I'm really glad to be here today in this course about decent work for refugees, access to decent work for refugees and other forcibly displaced persons. Social protection is one of the 4 strategic objectives of the decent work agenda. And the way I'm going to say a little bit about how we define social protection at the ILO. At the ILO, we use social protection and social security to refer to mean the same things, as a concept that means the same things. However, in many countries, they don't mean the same thing. Sometimes social security means only, in some countries, it refers only to the contributory social insurance, and social protection to the non-contributory social assistance. In some countries, social protection refers to everything, so including social security and including social insurance and social assistance, etc. For the sake of practicality, but also for you to know, if you look at most of ILO documents, we really use the 2 terms interchangeably to mean the same things. So what is social protection? Social protection, first of all, is a human right. It's a human right. It's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 22. It says that it's for all members of society, and refugees as a member of society are thus included. It's also a human right in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 9. It's also in the Child Rights Convention, in the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and it's in the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women. So it's really embedded in most human rights instruments. It's also in the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their Families, and of course in the Refugee Convention that Mattia just mentioned. So yes, it's a human right, and sorry, let me just. And it refers to a set of policies that aims to protect a person throughout his life cycle, throughout his life, for the various financial risks that he or she can face. Our flagship convention at the ILO, Convention 102 on social security minimum standards, defines these risks. And this convention defines 9 risks. It's really the flagship convention that gives the international legal definition of what is social security. And the 9 risks, or the 9 branches, are old age, so pensions, survivors benefits, survivors for like widows or widowers, invalidity benefits, sickness benefits, unemployment benefits, employment injury benefits, family benefits, and then one very important one also is access to healthcare, not to be overlooked. So then these 9 branches, or these 9 risks that are all social security branches, can be provided through social insurance, contributory social insurance, where it's partly paid by the worker and partly paid by the employer out of the contributions of workers and employers, or it can be provided through non-contributory social assistance schemes, such as emergency cash transfers, or any other kind of welfare scheme. Those can be financed from different sources, can be financed from taxes collected from the population, or they can be financed by a donor or an external partner, for example, provided by UNICEF, but financed by the Dutch government. So all of these types of schemes are what we call social protection. So now that I set the scene, despite Social Security being a human right and a human right for all, it says all members of society. It doesn't say it have to be residents. It doesn't say they have to have a status. So it includes refugees. It also includes asylum seekers, this human right. Some of the conventions make a difference between those with a regular status and those with an irregular status. This can have an impact sometimes, but as a human right, it's really available to all, including refugees, including asylum seekers, including forcibly displaced persons. Social protection is also at the heart of the SDGs. SDG 1, which promotes universal social protection, but also SDG 3 on universal health protection coverage, and then also on SDG 5, 8, and 10. 5, it's to cover the domestic workers, 8 is on decent work, and then 10 is on inequality. So despite all of this, according to estimates of the ILO, about 4.1 billion individuals still lack access to social protection worldwide. And among these that are not covered, there's a high number of migrant workers, refugees, and other forcibly displaced persons. Because, of course, migrant workers and refugees and forcibly displaced persons face somehow additional legal and practical barriers to access social protection because of the nationality or because of the territoriality of social protection. Because when they cross a border, they will have more challenges accessing social protection than someone who has lived and worked in one country and stayed there. So before I give the floor back, I just wanted to make one more comment. Now that we define social protection and social security, so part of social protection is these social insurance schemes that are financed by employers and worker contributions. These social insurance schemes are employment-based. They're linked to the fact that the beneficiary or the person that will receive the social protection has an employment, and that an employer is also paying contributions. And this is why providing refugees access to the labor market, to employment, is really important, and it's linked then to also being able to access social protection. Thank you. Giving the floor back to you.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you for this very comprehensive and very approachable, I'll say, easy to understand overview of the different branches of social protection, the different definitions that come into play. So I think it was, oh, yes, please.
I forgot to answer your second question. I just realized, sorry.
No, that's okay. If you want.
Do I still have some time?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay, so how does this translate at the national level? How does it translate? The way it translates is that countries over the world nearly all countries in the world, according to the statistics of the ILO, have at least one or a few social protection branches in place existing in the countries. So even if not all 9 branches are covered, all countries in the world have some existing social protection schemes. The idea really to make progress is for all countries to continue to build and strengthen their own social protection system for their own population. And then, of course, to make these systems as inclusive as possible. Of course, it's very important to be able to also focus on what is available to the population itself. It makes no sense to chronologically start by covering refugees when the population doesn't even have coverage. Also, including refugees into social protection systems, existing national social protection systems, it's a rather sound economic or financial option. It's rather cost effective because that way you grow the pool of beneficiaries, and so the risk distribution is larger. There's a bigger pool because people, in terms of social protection, you pay contributions, but not everybody will have the risk happen. For example, with sickness benefits, this is very clear. Not everyone will get sick. So there's a risk distribution. And this is better if the pool of candidates is bigger. It builds the system. It also helps build the system institutionally, of course, by integrating them, having a better system in place, better staff, better institutional processes. This can also be supported. And if this is stronger, it helps both refugees and host populations. In addition, but I think this is of course completely logical, it reduces tensions, of course, between the population and refugees, because there's no parallel system of a cash transfer being provided to a certain group of people and not to another group of persons. So the idea is really to help countries, I think, to progress, transition from these emergency cash transfers towards the integration of refugees and forcibly displaced persons as much as possible in national systems. I'm not saying this is easy, but I think a good step also to start is to start building the system itself for its own population. A very, very good step. And of course, we've had a few examples, at least a decade of experience already, I would say, in a few countries in Africa, but also in the Arab states. Together with UNHCR, we focused in the beginning on health, access to healthcare, which can often be a priority in humanitarian settings. But in some countries, there's been openings also for other branches of social security. And I think continuing to work on this and maybe replicating it or scaling it up will really help translate this right, this social security right for everyone, to make it a reality also for refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. So thank you for complementing also with the second part, which I think opens up interesting avenues for further discussion. And I think it offers a perfect sort of a way to bounce back to Mattia with the further question. So you mentioned this idea of transitioning from humanitarian cash assistance to something that is more sustainable over the longer term, that has more of a developmental lens, going back to this idea of working across the humanitarian development and peace nexus, involving the host communities as well, instead of creating parallel systems. So while we've seen this growing trend towards the recognition of the need to prioritize social protection access for refugees recently, Mattia, can you tell us more about the concrete ways that governments, but also international partners, can achieve this transition from the immediate response, the immediate humanitarian assistance, to a more long-standing, long-term view of building up social protection programs? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Miki. And thanks also, Clara, for already introducing some elements to this answer. I will try to be as concrete as possible with some country examples as well. So I think the main message I want to give is that there is no one size fits all approach when we talk about inclusion of refugees in social protection systems. So it really depends on the context, and I think the way we could simplify a bit the message here is that I think there are three main factors we could look at when we develop a strategy towards inclusion, and the first one being the host context, so the context in the host country. And this means looking at, of course, the political will. Is there a political will from the government to work on inclusion or not? But also what Clara was talking about, so the maturity of the social protection system. So which branches actually exist in the country, and that really defines for us the entry point to also engage on inclusion in social protection. It could be in some cases it has been social insurance, which is in some cases an easier sell because it requires a contribution from the beneficiaries, being nationals or refugees. But in some case, increasingly, we also see opportunities to work on social assistance and cash transfers, as you mentioned. It could also be social services for vulnerable groups and so on. A second factor, of course, and we mentioned this, is that we take into account when developing a strategy is the population group we are dealing with, being it refugees, IDPs, returnees, or others, as they have different rights and different access challenges. And lastly, and I would say very importantly, is we need to consider the displacement cycle. So, and I call it cycle because, again, you may have different also types of displacement existing in the same country, right? So you may have an emergency, new arrivals of refugees or new movements of IDPs coexisting with a protracted caseload. So refugees who have been in a country for 2 or 3 decades. And then we also have a context where we are advancing towards solutions. So all of these three, let's say, dimensions can actually happen in some cases in the same country. So I think having said that, based on these factors, we see 3 main ways to engage with social protection systems. One is, and the easy one, let's say, we try to align as much as possible the humanitarian assistance with what exists in the social protection system. And this is, of course, to facilitate transition in the future. And this is what you said. I mean, it's important we try to avoid parallel system from the onset of an emergency. We try to ensure there is to the extent possible, it's not always possible, the inequality of treatment. The second way we can do that is what Clara was introducing, is the idea of strengthening social protection system and at the same time trying to adapt them, adjust them to the needs and capacities of forcibly displaced people. So, and this is really the long-term change we want to achieve. And thirdly, a third avenue for working and engaging with national social protection systems is looking at the shock responsive social protection mechanism that in some countries exists as a way of preparing or responding. So using social protection system to prepare or respond to an emergency. And we do see also this as an opportunity for including displacement lenses. And that's something that was quite clear during the for the COVID-19 response measures, which in many cases actually included also refugees. So I will now give you some concrete examples on how what type of activities we can implement depending on these various scenarios and contexts. So in terms of so I would categorize two different types of activities. The first group is more like preparatory activities that we can implement at the system level to really prepare and facilitate transition and inclusion. And the second one will be more technical actions that we can take to adapt and adjust to the social protection delivery chain, so more at the program level. So in terms of the more general activities, one that we really almost systematically do whenever we engage with national social protection system is a feasibility analysis. So we really try to look at of course, the national context, the branches that exist, the displacement context, the political will, and we try to also look at the costing, right, and the modeling of inclusion, the economic modeling of inclusion, and the aim of all these is to build an investment case for the government in case there is a need, but also for international development partners, because also that's where we see in many cases funding should come from should the national budget not be sufficient to cover, to expand also to forcibly displaced people. And this is a work that is actually happening in several countries, most recently also in Egypt, where there is a interagency research project looking at different aspects on different programs as well, social assistance, but also health insurance, and also what are the different scenarios there. A second activity, of course, it relates more to the policy and legal frameworks. So in many countries we engage, we provide support to adjust and reform social protection policies and social protection laws. Most recently, there has been some interesting progress in relation to the new draft social protection policy in Kenya. And really here the idea is to provide support to governments in really recognizing displacement as one of the key vulnerabilities. I mean, we go back to what's the purpose of social protection, right? It's to protect people from risks and vulnerabilities across their life cycle. In some countries, they do not tie this objective to the nationality. They say, if you are in this territory, you should be protected. So for displacement as a key vulnerability embedded in the law, and then really recognize rights, as Clara comprehensively gave us a good picture of what international instruments, legal instruments exist that recognize the right of social protection. And it's important that these are also embedded in national laws. So that's where we come in. A third type of activity still belonging to these more system level changes is relating to data. So it's something that constantly come up as a big challenge. We engage in various ways to strengthen socioeconomic data in terms of collecting this data, analyzing this data in a way that are comparable with socioeconomic data of national citizens. And this is, again, very important, not only to build this investment case that really enables us to say, okay, what are the implications, what are the different scenarios, what are the costs, but also eventually to share this data, right, when we actually proceed towards inclusion. And this with this, I move to the second group of activities, which are the more concrete technical adjustment to the social protection delivery chain. I mean, I know this is not a course specific on social protection. So the way we, as UNHCR, let's say we follow the same social protection definition that Clara and ILO has. So we are not reinventing the wheel, but maybe here just to say that indeed we usually see a more system level a building block of a social protection framework. Then we have a number of programs. We mentioned many of them, social insurance schemes, social assistance programs, social services, and so on. And at the bottom, we also see a social protection delivery chain that and delivery mechanisms to implement all of these programs. So we do know that when we talk about inclusion, we can't just copy paste a program that is designed for nationals, for refugees. There are a number of adjustments that need to be made to those delivery chains. And one of them is, as I was mentioning, related to data. So it's important that in many countries, we have been working on enrolling refugees into national social registries. So here there is a lot of different modalities that we can go for and different approaches to data management. We can have a joint, for example, registration by the government or parallel registration, or perhaps UNHCR shares the data on refugees with the government. Another action which really, I think, tackles a very important bottleneck that we see in many countries is really working on reaching out and raise awareness of refugees of what their rights are and what are the obstacles for them to access social protection programs. So they may have the rights recognized by law, as we said, in the specific country, but there may be concrete obstacles and steps that they need to take. And this is also an interesting work that we have been doing in Morocco, involving refugee community leaders and really piloting with the government kind of parallel registration into the national population registry of both that was going at the same time, let's say, for a new process for both nationals and refugees. Yeah, and then I think you mentioned this idea of the importance of really building and strengthening program for all. This is a concept that is very important also and resonates a lot also for UNHCR operations. And one way we see that happening is what we call area-based approaches. So there are many projects that are aimed at strengthening social protection programs by, for example, international development partners or the World Bank and the ILO. And it's important that these look at improving access to social protection for both displaced and host communities, because host communities oftentimes are also, they reside in remote locations, they are underserved. So we do see this inclusion approach also as a sort of, it could be in some cases a very important win-win situation as it improves the conditions of both communities. Last point I wanted to make before I wrap up is, I mean, this course is about decent work, and here it's a whole, let's say, I kept it general on social protection, but then there is a whole discussion that we could make about the linkages between access to work and access to social protection, which makes this work more decent, let's say. And this is also an important area where we work as UNHCR in terms of increasing refugees' access to jobs and to economic and financial inclusion, because in that way, really, they can contribute as well to the contributory social protection schemes that exist, and that for us is also a powerful element of that investment case, right? Because we need to also present the refugees not as a monolithic group, but we have groups that are more vulnerable and therefore more in need of social assistance and social services, but we also have refugees with strong background and skills and human capital that they're bringing to the country of where they're hosted, and therefore allowing them to work and to contribute to the system really is an asset and for the government itself. So I wanted to conclude with a optimistic note, saying that there are barriers and challenges to inclusion. It's not an easy thing that we do, but we see that it's possible to have forcibly displaced people accessing social protection systems. And we do see this happening in many high and middle income countries. We have examples in Europe, in Latin America. In Latin America, Venezuelans have actually access in many countries, being Colombia, being Brazil. There are very interesting models of this transition, right, where it happens in a relatively smooth way, and we are learning from these experiences. However, it is also possible to achieve inclusion in social protection in lower income countries, and that may require international financing from development partners, but it is something that it is actually happening. So in the example I will bring is Mauritania, where through, again, a multi-stakeholder approach involving World Bank financing, WFP also supported with the targeting, but really we were able to include all refugee households in the country. They were registered through the National Social Registry, and about half of them were found eligible through to national social assistance programs, and they're actually receiving cash transfers from the government. Of course, these was most of these was internationally funded through the World Bank IDA window for host communities and refugees. However, I know there are ongoing discussions with the government on how to make this, on how to improve the fiscal appropriation by the government and how to make this more sustainable in the future. So I'll pause here, but happy to if there are any follow-ups or any questions.
Thank you, Mattia. I think you put a lot of meat on the bones of this discussion. It was a really interesting contributions. There are a couple of points that you mentioned that I think will resonate with our participants, because these are points that, once again, we've touched upon briefly in a more general way in the previous webinars, and it's nice to see now to see them the same lenses or the same issues applied to a very concrete case like the one of extending social protection to refugees. So you mentioned the importance of data and data management. This was indeed the topic of the last webinar, where we discussed with Grace, Stefan, on how proper management of data and of information can make visible challenges, stories that would have otherwise remained invisible. So this idea of going beyond that and improving the visibility of the information that is there, but also the challenge of sometimes raising awareness amongst the displaced populations themselves. They have rights, but they may not always know that they have those rights, and they may not always know how to go about to make sure that those rights are actually properly enjoyed. And again, this was discussed in depth in the last webinar. I see that there's already one question in the chat box. I wonder, Abdurrahim, if you will allow me, I will ask one last question to Clara, and then I will open the floor to questions from the participants. Because Clara, you mentioned earlier that you have that there are already about a decade of experiences in different areas in Africa, in the Middle East, and I wonder if you can tell us more about what these concrete experiences are. What are the main entry points that you have found on the way to inclusion of refugees and forcibly displaced persons in national social protection systems? Any emerging good practices, or any sometimes we're also interested in seeing what didn't work and why it didn't work. So any emerging good practices, but also any failures that you were able to learn from. Thank you.
Thank you. So more generally, as a global good practice, what we've seen, there's a lot of evidence around the world that really countries with a solid social protection system in place are much better equipped to respond if there's any shock that happens. So this is at the macro level, but also at the level of the individual or the household. It's the same. Those that have access to social protection as an individual or household are much better equipped they have more resilience to any shocks, any financial shocks that can happen because of a natural disaster, a drought, maybe the crops didn't work this year, or any other kind of financial risk. Somebody got sick in the family, somebody got unemployed. So I think social protection by itself is really an excellent tool to build resilience, to help also at the macro level have countries better face and respond to any shocks that can happen. So this is really the good practice. But of course, what we see is that social protection, not all countries have a solid, comprehensive social protection system in place that covers all 9 branches. And so in these past 10 years, we've worked mainly with countries who were interested in building their social protection system and making them inclusive. So in terms of entry points, of course, there's several things countries can do. So first, we mentioned it a few times. Well, the very first one is, of course, they can ratify international labor standards and human rights conventions. Even if they don't ratify them, they're quite full of guidance, especially the international labor standards, on how actually to build your social protection system. So this is one. The second one that we already mentioned is countries can build and strengthen their social protection systems. And then they can also adapt the system or the scheme that they have to make the design more adaptable to the needs of refugees and other people. So I can give you an example on that. I'll come back to that. Another thing that they can do, and Mattia mentioned this also, that is actually very important, and it's not a side or a secondary thing, it's something that always should happen, is countries should then also look at any complementary measures to address the practical obstacles so that the population and refugees actually do have access to social protection. So it's not just about changing the law and the design of the scheme, but it's also ensuring that they know about the scheme. They know how to access the procedure. Is the information material available? Is the outreach services available? Is it actually accessible geographically, etc.? So this is down the delivery chain that Mattia referred to. It's very important that this delivery is also efficient. It's not just about changing the law. So then coming back to how to adapt existing schemes to the needs of refugees. So here, of course, there's a few entry points too, because what we've seen from this decade of experience actually is that in many countries, there was an interest from the government side, but politically, let's say, to build social protection systems or to adapt them, to make them inclusive for workers in the informal economy. And by helping governments develop studies or feasibility studies with costed scenarios of how to extend social protection to informal economy workers, this then also opened the door to include refugees who were part of these informal economy workers. We did this with UNHCR. These 10 years of experience have been happening with UNHCR. And we've documented this experience in the ILO UNHCR handbook. Actually, that handbook is only on health, but we're in the process of looking also at how to document and extend and perhaps update the handbook to also look at the other branches, because since we have evolved and also supported countries with some of the other branches, but health has been the main focus in the beginning. So the entry point indeed is health. The entry point is whether the system is already in place at the national level. Another entry point can be the informal economy workers. And the idea is then really to create a policy space, a dialogue to see what can be prioritized and if there's political support for that. And then this can really happen by showing the feasibility and the cost of it. This can also help. Mattia already said it, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating a little. Whatever humanitarian agency or donor is already financing emergency cash transfers, they can then see that instead of financing the cash transfer, they can perhaps subsidize the contribution for refugees in a temporary short-term basis. So these costed scenarios, I think, are extremely useful. And then at the same time, which we also saw in some of the countries we worked together with UNHCR, it was necessary to look at the obstacle that was actually an obstacle in a country, like, for example, the identity cards were not available. There's no outreach. The information on whether the scheme is existing or not was not available in the appropriate languages. So there's really always a need to also look at what the practical obstacles are and also see what can be done at that level. So in addition to this, what else can I say? Maybe I wanted to highlight that beside the human rights instruments that I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of international labor standards, conventions and recommendations. On social security, we have about 10 on social security specifically that are for workers. And so unless it's specifically specified that refugees are excluded, then if they are workers, they're included because they're for all workers. There's also 2 migrant-specific conventions that we have at the ILO and 2 migrant-specific recommendations. These specifically also cover refugees. And what was I going to say? I'm so sorry. Yes. So ratifying these international labor standards can help set common rules for all workers in a certain country. It also gives useful guidance. And also, if a country ratifies, then the ILO gives priority support in terms of implementation of the convention. And then maybe we'll see if we have lots of questions in the chat, but otherwise I'll have a question to the participants, if I can.
Thank you. That sounds great, actually, to sort of flip the lens a little bit back towards the participant. We do have one question in the chat box. So just to give a bit of context, in the group of participants, we have representatives of employers organizations and also one representative of worker organization. I am not sure whether all of them are online at this moment, but we do have one question from Abdurrahim, who is asking, what is the role of employers in contributing to increasing access to social protection for refugees? And may I expand on this? Like, what experience you have, or what the knowledge do you have of the role of different social partners and the interplay between the different social partners in advancing social protection access for refugees? Thank you.
Shall I answer first, and then Mattia can add? Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
If you want. Yes, so employers have absolutely, they have a role to play in terms of increasing social protection access to refugees. As I said before, in terms of social insurance is a contributory social insurance is paid from contributions from employers and paid from contributions from workers. But it's not just about this linkage. The reality is that if workers do not have to pay contributions to social protection in a certain country, then these workers are cheaper than the nationals that do have to pay mandatory social security contributions. So this then creates unfair competition between nationals and non-national workers, which can really lead to race to the bottom, basically. And in many cases, what we have seen is that employers are very much promoting refugees' access to social protection to reduce this unfair competition as a sound economic policy. Also, obviously, if you have a worker that is that has access to health, that is less sick, whose children are well taken care of, who has well, access to social protection, the motivation of the worker and the reputation of the company also has positive impacts on those aspects. Anything else I missed on employers'
Mattia,
role? The trade unions.
yes.
Also. So of course, I mean, trade unions represent workers. So as soon as refugees are workers or forcibly displaced people are workers, they will represent them too. It depends how it's organized in a country, but normally there's trade unions that represent sectors of activities or workers in certain sectors. So we have seen in some countries that trade unions are often limited to the nationals of a country, but it's not always the case. There's many exceptions. For example, in Tunisia, where UGTT has a specific migrant division, and they have a policy for migrant workers, and they represent non-nationals, migrants in Tunisia also. I have other examples also, Hong Kong, Philippines, Asia. So, and then beside that, trade unions as well as employer organizations have a big role to play whenever there's a social dialogue process in a country, a social dialogue process that supports legal reforms or the reform of a social security scheme. Very important, so that it's anchored in social reality and that it's really socially responsive and responsive to the needs of the workers.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you very much, Mattia. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add.
Well, I think ILO is the expert on this. For me, it's really important that we acknowledge that employers do play a very important role, and you know, more generally, because as we all said, access to work and economic inclusion is an absolute requirement, and it has to go hand in hand with inclusion in social protection. These two things need to be linked as much as possible if we want to maximize the impact. But more specifically, they should hire refugees as much as possible. One action, I mean, this goes back to what Clara was saying. I think in the majority of refugees, actually, they work in the informal sectors, even where there is inclusion, right? So if we look at Colombia, the large majority of Venezuelans there, they work informally, and the same is in the Middle East for Syrians. But in both these cases, like if we look at Colombia or also Jordan, the governments are actually opening up to the possibility of for informal workers, being nationals or non-nationals, to access social insurance or certain components of social insurance. And so it's important that employers are aware of these possibilities and perhaps walk the additional mile that may be required to do this. So there is an awareness issue, but there is also a more of administrative issue, right? So to really ensure that the paperwork is there to enable refugee workers, formal but also informal, as we have seen, to contribute and to access those social insurance benefits that they are entitled to.
Thank you, Mattia. Thank you very much. And thank you, Clara, also for your response to these questions. And let me maybe launch one last encouragement to our participants. If there are any further questions on the topics that we have discussed today, any reflections or anything that you would like to share from your own background, from your own professional context, we're happy to hear from you. We still have some minutes in the session, and we may have some time for further questions. And I see that there's something popping up in the chat, and then there's one raised hand. So I'm going to go to the chat first. Gerald is asking, social protection among refugee and FTPs hosting developing countries seems to be a goal beyond reach, given the increased level of unemployment, corruption, and economic crisis. So how have other refugee hosting countries in the EU succeeded in achieving social protection for refugees, FTPs, and host communities within the informal sector? So this is a very complex question with many different elements and many different layers, but perhaps you would like to give it a try. I don't know who would like to go first, whether Mattia or Clara on this. So
I can start.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I get the point on the informal sector, but of course there is a big difference if we are talking about developing countries versus the European Union. And I said that from the beginning. I mean, we see inclusion happening relatively smoothly in many countries in Latin America, in many countries in Europe. And of course, there are additional challenges when we move to countries that have a more constrained fiscal space and a weaker social protection system. So the approach is very different. So this is what I said in my intervention earlier. Specifically in the European Union, I mean, the European Union, the context really changed after the Ukraine crisis, and the government, the European Union first was very fast in approving the temporary protection directive, which was in the making since a few years already, and that really provided sort of a legal basis for including refugees from Ukraine into national social protection systems, at least for the initial years. And the way the TPD was received in the host countries, of course, varies. It was not uniform. And also what we have noticed is that the inclusion, so the inclusion sort of was dependent on pre-existing limitations of the national systems. So some systems were more ready than others, let's say, to absorb additional caseload. So we have seen how progress has been quite fast in countries like Poland, that really, but even Ukraine itself. I mean, these countries had very recently developed how do you say, digitalized information management systems within their social protection framework. So those, of course, were also very concrete and pragmatic tools that enabled fast inclusion. Yeah.
Thank you, Mattia. Clara, is there anything that you would like to complement as well?
And which question was it? Sorry. Is it in the chat?
Yes, it's the one about so it's a bit of a comparison between what happens in developing countries that are hosting refugees, where
Yes.
inclusion in social protection system seems to be a goal beyond reach. And what's happening, on the other hand, in the EU, whether there's been some success in achieving social protection for refugees and host communities, also with the additional complexity of them being in the informal sector.
So I think in the EU, what we see is that as soon as in most of the EU countries, perhaps all, recognize refugees as refugees, and refugees get the refugee status officially, and on that basis they can reside and work in those countries. And as soon as that happens, because of the principles of equality of treatment in terms of social security and non-discrimination, those people who have the refugee status will have the same treatment in terms of social protection as nationals. So this is the same actually if they work in the informal sector or in the formal sector. So what does it mean? It means that if, for example, in France, I'll give an example from France. If in France you can have access to the healthcare insurance after 3 months residency, then this is the same for a French national. For example, I'm half French, so if I live in another country for many years and then I come back to France, in the first 3 months I will not have access to health insurance in my own country. I will have to wait 3 months. I will have to have 3 months residency before I have access, because it's equality of treatment between non-nationals and nationals. It doesn't matter whether I'm a French national. And this is also accessible. This health insurance that I'm talking about after 3 months residency in France is also accessible for workers in the informal sector. So this is a concrete example. I think these two principles of equality of treatment in terms of social protection and non-discrimination are extremely important. We talk about inclusive social protection system, but when we talk about it, this is what we mean. We're talking about equality of treatment and non-discrimination on the basis of nationality and on the basis of nationality. So there can't be discrimination on the basis of nationality. There can be conditions based on residency, on the duration of residency, on the duration of the employment. There can be conditions, but not a differentiation between nationals and non-nationals in that sense. I hope that's clear.
Absolutely. Thank you, Clara. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mattia, as well. So I saw that there was a raised hand by, I think it was Hind, Hind Mohammed Safaildin. I saw that you had raised your hand. So if you would like to take the floor, we're happy to listen. And I suspect that for the speakers, Clara and Mattia, you may want to switch your interpretation channel, I think. Hind, if you can hear us.
صباح الخير. Good morning, everyone. I had a question to Mattia. He said that there were studies in Egypt concerning social protection. I wanted to know if this research was done, and if with whom was it done, and what were the results, and who were the partners in Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you, Hind. Mattia, were you able to switch to the? Okay, so for you, you mentioned. Okay, I'll just relay the information. The question was directed at you because you mentioned earlier that there were some studies being done or having been done in Egypt specifically, and so because the participant is from Egypt, Hind is from Egypt, she wanted to know. If you could tell us a bit more about those studies, who were the partners that you worked with, what were the results, or if you can share a link perhaps even to the publication, if those studies have been published.
Yes, I will check if there is something published. I'm not entirely sure, but in general, I will say it's a project that was led by UNICEF with the Economic Research Forum, and that involved also the ILO and UNHCR and really the purpose was to, as I said, look at really what is feasible. So there were different, let's say, work streams. One looking more at the perceptions of refugees. One was looking at the Takaful and Karama program and the developing scenarios there. One was looking at the universal health insurance scheme, on which a lot of work has been done already over the past years between ILO and UNHCR. Trying to remember all of the work streams, but there were 5 work streams, all kind of interconnected, with the idea of looking at the social protection system as a whole. And this was presented also and discussed with the government and with a number of donors through a workshop, I think a few months ago. Of course, it's a complicated discussion, right? So this is research stage. There is nothing yet, let's say, a concrete step yet, but I find it very interesting because I think it's the right approach, even when these are long-term processes. So it's important that we start studying the situation and discussing it with both the government stakeholders, so not only the Ministry of Social Solidarity, but also Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is the main interlocutor when it comes to refugees, and also with the embassies and the donors and development partners and the World Bank. The World Bank has been financing this in many countries. So and it's only through these discussions that eventually we may unlock some doors. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
will search if there is something public. And
thank you, Mattia. Thank you for that. If you can share, if you find the link, if you can share it, it would be very helpful. Clara, I see that you have opened your microphone. Is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yes, just very quickly. I also didn't find any published one yet. But I think what is really interesting in these processes, including in the Egypt process, is that of course, we work with the government authorities. But when we work with government authorities, this actually means with many different. So these dialogue processes, often in terms of social protection, involve a lot of different actors. Ministry of Social Solidarity, Ministry of Foreign Affairs were mentioned by Mattia, but also the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Finance. In Egypt, there's the, let me see, I'll give you more specifically. There's also other stakeholders that we involve, by the way, who are non-governmental. So workers and employers, but also NGOs or whoever is also working with refugees. And then in terms of authorities, I'm having them here. So there's the General Authority for Healthcare Accreditation and Regulation. There's the General Authority for Healthcare. There's the Egyptian Authority for Standard Procurement and Medical Technology Management. So it's really trying to involve as many as possible. And of course, the Universal Health Insurance Authority of Egypt. Voilà. So it's important that indeed in a policy dialogue process that as many national stakeholders are involved that are relevant, and often there are quite a lot that are relevant for these processes.
Thank you, Clara. So thank you for complementing that. And remaining on to Egypt, I'm going to pick up on another comment that is being made in the chat by Mariam. Mariam, I know that you had connection issues last time, but I wonder if you would like to take the floor and talk to us about the example that you put in the chat. It's probably not possible. So I'm going to read from her contribution in the chat. Or
yes,
Yes, Mariam,
sorry.
thank you. We're happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, my name is Mariam Tawadros from Egypt. There are some examples here in Egypt, like the employers provide some systems like a fellowship fund to provide a fund for refugees and migrants or even citizens. It's some each employee have to pay some from his salary to put inside this box, and after that the employer can also add some money, some amount, and in the end of the period they can use this money even in emergency cases or in the end of the employment period or something like this. So it's possible to rely on these examples as a non-governmental social system, but also it's considered a transformation of refugees and displaced people access to social protection. So it's not a governmental, but it's a private examples. I think it maybe help.
Thank you, Mariam, for sharing this experience. Clara, Mattia, I don't know if you have any reactions to the possibility of relying on non-governmental schemes.
Yeah, so actually, of course, I mean, if refugees have access to nothing at all, and the employer provides them access to such a scheme, this is, of course, good, I think, for the refugee. However, entering them into a public system, there's even more benefits doing this than providing them with private insurance. But definitely, if they have nothing, no access to the public system, then providing them protection through a private insurance is beneficial, I think, for both the refugee and overall for the company. So actually what I wanted to say about this is that in the beginning, this is how we started developing the partnership actually with UNHCR, because in the beginning, UNHCR was financing, subsidizing contributions for private health insurance to refugees in certain countries for residual caseload. And we discovered that perhaps this was not so cost efficient. And it would have been more cost efficient to include them in national public systems rather than paying for these expensive private health insurance systems. And at the same time, this would allow UNHCR to contribute to other objectives that they were aiming at, namely help governments build the system, reduce tensions between the population and the refugees, etc., etc. So lots of benefits beside the cost, but for sure also the cost. And I think this is the same for employers in Egypt. If they can reduce the cost and pay for refugees to be part of the national system, then if this is accessible and if possible in the law, then this would be an advantage. I think this could be rather convincing.
Thank you, Clara. Mattia, is there also anything from your side? I see
yeah, I mean, I also put on some additional information in the chat on the Egypt, since I was not prepared. And on the informality, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's also, I mean, just to complement, I think it's also about what we call let's say, informal social protection or community-based social protection. It's in some cases that can be an important contribution where either government systems are weak or where there is no political will for inclusion. So it's a sort of complementary way of really improving the conditions on the ground for refugees. And I'm talking here more in general, not about the private insurance, but definitely can be less sustainable. So we also want to always look at the formal government systems because we see that as an avenue that can be more sustainable in the long term. Then there is the issue of the parity gap as well, right? If we want to ensure that refugees have their needs met, how does that cover that needs? And not to say that systematically government systems will meet those needs. We know how many problems there are in terms of adequacy of social protection schemes. So it's an issue that I think it's relevant both for government and informal social protection. And on the insurance part, I think Clara said it very well. We have been trying both models. There are pros and cons. Again, private schemes can be more expensive and require a higher contribution from both the beneficiary and so especially in situations where income is not that high. I mean, it can be very tricky to sustain those, and there are many countries where UNHCR is actually paying for that, but that's not the most sustainable model we want to see on the ground.
Thank you, Mattia. Thank you very much. I'm going to pick up on two more comments that I see in the chat. There's one from Lucy Otto about the situation in Uganda, saying that they're developing stronger, more inclusive social protection systems that supports both refugees and host communities. However, the challenge is the protracted number of refugees and the difficulty in moving them towards resilience and self-reliance. And of course, this is, I would say, a widely shared challenge. And there's also one comment from Manal. And for this one, I would ask the interpreters for help. Mattia and Clara, if you would like to listen to the interpretation, I would ask you to click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation and then select the English channel, and there you should be able to hear it. So can I ask the interpreters to please help us read the comment from Manal?
Sure. So Manal is saying, we are working in Egypt to support providing refugees with social protection and integration in the activities and schemes to qualify them to access the labor market in cooperation with the ILO in Egypt. And we have signed a cooperation protocol with UNHCR in Egypt and with the Ministry of Youth and Sports. She says, I'm Manal Jamal from the Ministry of Youth in Egypt.
Thank you. Thank you for the language support, and thank you, Manal, for sharing this. I don't know if there's any reaction from Clara and Mattia before we close.
No, I mean, that's great. I think it's what we see in Egypt is that things are happening at different levels, again, with different ministries and with different UN agencies. I think what we see is also a good collaboration between UN agencies, which is I think a strong factor in when we see successful developments. And I'm quite hopeful. Again, they're long-term processes, but when we see this type of collaboration between the interministerial and interagency, it's really promising.
Thank you, Clara. I see that you're nodding your head. Is there anything that you would also want to add, or
No,
any
I
closing
totally
remarks? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, let me then thank you both very much for joining us today. I see that we've used the time that we had set aside for this session quite productively. So thank you for your contributions. Thank you to the participants for their interventions, their questions, and their comments. It's been a pleasure as usual to be part of this session with you all. Thank you so much to the interpreters for their promptness in responding to our little technical issue at the beginning. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. With the participants, I think we will see you, hopefully all of you, or most of you, on Monday morning here in Turin. I don't know if my colleague Marion maybe has some announcements to make about the next steps in the course.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So thank you very much to Mattia and Clara. The session was very, very interesting. And so I think you don't really want to listen to my meteo forecast for next week, but thank you very much again. Thank you to the interpreters. It has been challenging also this morning for several reasons. So thank you again. And we are happy to meet you in person next week, Mirna and Elisa. For the participants, we had told you that a bit about the weather forecast for next week, which is starting to be a bit less nice as it was 2 days ago. There is a very heavy rain. I'm not finding the word perturbation, rain event, let's say, a very heavy rain event going through Europe, actually from Northern Europe. It's coming down. And so I would say temperatures also are going down. So I would say you have to base your luggage packing, preparing an umbrella, travel umbrella, and raincoat, and some more heavy clothes. So that's it.
Yes.
On my side.
Thank you. Thank you, Marion. Indeed, the weather forecast has been changing. The temperatures have dropped a little bit. Sun is still forecast for the second part of the week, so from Wednesday onward, but it may change. So just to be on the safe side, make sure that you bring some warm clothes and waterproof or rainproof jacket or an umbrella. This may have an impact on our study visit, just for you to know, because the location that we were going to visit is in the middle of a park in a rural area. So if the rain is really heavy, there may be some challenges to access it, because we would have to walk in the mud. So if that is the case, we already have a plan B, and we will give you more information on Monday when we see what the situation, with more clarity, what the situation will be. So thank you for your patience with this, and we will keep you posted. Thank you again to Clara and Mattia, and thank you to the participants and the interpreters, and we're very excited to see you next week. More information will be shared with you via email and posted on the eCampus between today and tomorrow. And look out tomorrow for the quiz, the final quiz of the online phase. Thank you all, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you to you also.
Thank you.
Moderating, organizing. Thanks. Thanks, Marion.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you to all.